morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome back to chapter 19. We're talking about the chordates. Remember, we talked about we're in domain Eukarya, we're in kingdom Animalia, we're in phylum Chordata. The animals that we just got done talking about in the previous video, the sea squirts, are in subphylum Urochordata. I didn't spell that very well, I'm sorry. Subphylum Urochordata. We're now going to move on from the non-vertebrate chordates and talk about our next subphylum, which is subphylum Vertebrata. Subphylum Vertebrata. Remember, when we were talking about the other animals, and I would give you numbers of species, we said that there's 100,000 mollusks. We said there's 9,000 sponges. I said, well, how many species of vertebrates are there? And I said there's 60,000 species of vertebrates. 60,000 species of vertebrates, and half of them are fish. Half of them are fish. So when we're talking about species of vertebrates, that's subphylum Vertebrata. Now, to be fair, before we go very much further, almost all chordates are vertebrates. Pretty much like when we talked about the bugs, and we said, look, there's subphylum Chelicerata, there's the horseshoe crab, but then all the rest of them, then the rest of the chelicerates were the arachnids. All right, same situation. There are a few chordates that aren't vertebrates. Almost all chordates are vertebrates, which is why they get their own subphylum Vertebrata. And within each subphylum, there will be classes, and we'll talk about different classes of vertebrates in a minute. To be a vertebrate, you've got to have a segmented vertebral column. When you think of a spinal column, that's what you're thinking of. We've all seen skeletons in biology lab. We've all seen skeletons in scary or not so scary movies. And when you talk about the vertebrae in the back, that's exactly what we're talking about. Segmented vertebral column. That structure comes from the notochord. The notochord forms first during development and then subdivides into the structure that we call the vertebral column. All vertebrates are going to have a distinct head with a cranium and a brain. The cranium is specifically the case that surrounds your brain inside. That sea squirt that we looked at in the previous video, it didn't have a head. All of the organisms we're going to look at from here on out are going to have an actual head. It might not be as easy to see as like ours is, but you will see that they all have a clear, obvious head. They'll all have a skull case, as in a hard case that surrounds the brain and protects the brain. A distinct cranium with a brain inside. All vertebrates have a closed circulatory system. And we talked about how this was kind of a big deal, and the reason why the cephalopods were a big deal is that amongst the rest of the mollusks, they were the ones that had a closed circulatory system. You know, clams don't have they have an open circulatory system. Bugs, they have an open circulatory system. Kind of a big deal that all vertebrates have a closed circulatory system. And most have bone, and we'll talk about the ones that don't when we get there. Our first group, our first class of vertebrates are our simplest class of vertebrates, and this is class Agnetha. Class Agnetha. What does nath mean? What does it look like? What does it sound like? Where have you ever seen something like that before? Nath kind of sounds a little bit like Nash. I will cast you into the outer darkness where there will be much weeping and gnashing of teeth. What does gnash mean? What does it mean to gnash your teeth? It means to grind back and forth. You're mad, you're angry. All right, so grinding your jaw, grinding your teeth, gnash, nath, it means jaw. What does it mean when you put a in front of anything? It means without. So class Agnetha literally translates to mean no jaw, the jawless fish. About 120 species of agnethans. There are two groups of agnethans, and to be fair, to leave them together in the same kingdom is sort of inaccurate, but we're not going to get that specific about it. They've actually been separated into their own kingdoms, or not kingdoms, excuse me, classes. They've been separated into their own classes now, but we're going to leave them grouped together in this class called Agnetha. There are two groups of agnethans, the hagfish and lamprey. And what we see on this picture right here is the lamprey. The easiest way to tell the difference between hagfish and lamprey is if you see an eye, if you see dots on the throat, like this, here's the eye, here are the dots on the throat, it's a lamprey. That's it, it's a lamprey. What are lamprey? It's inappropriate to say that they're vertebrate leeches, but lamprey are basically vertebrate leeches. How do they live? They live by attaching literally with their sucker-like mouth. I'll show you a picture in just a minute. With their sucker-like mouth, and then they use their toothed tongue to drill a hole into their host, and then they suck their juices out. They suck out the blood. All right, lamprey. They do this to, obviously, fish. They're mostly marine, though there are some freshwater lamprey, not many. However, lamprey, even the marine ones, they begin their life in freshwater to the point to where actually it was believed there were two separate species. The immature lamprey were called glass eels. Immature lamprey it wasn't known for a long time that actually that's what they were. They grow up to become mature lamprey. Kind of neat, interesting. So here we see that toothed tongue, or here we see that sucker-like mouth of the lamprey. This is that toothed tongue, which is used to drill into the side of the animal. Notice how the sucker has teeth-like recurved teeth around this, what's called the oral disc. And they use that to attach to their prey animal. And if you look really close at this fish right here, you can see this big scar. And that scar is where there had been a lamprey attached to this thing. And look at this poor fish. You can see there's still two on it, and there was another one that has since dropped off. How awful of a life would this animal have with these literal bloodsuckers attached to them day and night? Look at this. Look where this one is going. It's actually going into the animal's throat. It's attached to its gills. Imagine having something like that stuck in your throat, and you don't have thumbs, and you can't get it out. How awful it must be for this animal. These are lamprey. This right here is a hagfish. Notice how we don't clearly see any kind of an eye. It does have an eye. It's just really small. And we don't see those throat holes, which I'm not sure if you can see in the picture, but there are throat holes, similar to the gill slits on sharks. You don't see that here. This is a hagfish. These things are parasites. These things are scavengers. They don't attach to living things. They don't harm living things. They just clean up dead bodies. That's all they do. They clean up dead bodies. These right here are called slime eels. If you've ever had an eel skin wallet or eel skin leather, it's actually hagfish leather. They are not eels because an eel is a fish, and these are not bony fish. These are jawless fish, two totally separate classes of animals. Our next is Classchondrichthyes. What does chondro mean? Chondro means cartilage. What does ichthy mean? Ichthy literally means fish. So what is the translation of this class? Classchondrichthyes is literally the cartilage fish. And I forgot to put it up on the board, I'm sorry. Classchondrichthyes. Remember, only about 120 species of agnethans. There's 1,000 species of cartilage fish. Lots more cartilaginous fishes than there are agnethans, jawless fishes. The cartilage fish are shark, skates, and rays. You know what a shark looks like. You probably have a really good idea of what a ray looks like. Think of a stingray, think of a manta ray. A skate. Skates are, they sort of kind of look like a cross between a shark and a ray. Sort of, a little bit. Skates are kind of their own little beast. They have a cartilaginous skeleton. And we said, when we talked about the vertebrates, we said, look, most vertebrates have bone. Agnethans don't have bone. They have a cartilage skeleton. Chondrichthyans don't have a bone skeleton. They have a cartilaginous skeleton. These are mostly marine. There are some freshwater chondrichthyes. There are some freshwater sharks, very, very few. There are some freshwater rays, like freshwater stingrays. But most of them live in the ocean, most of them marine. Chondrichthyes don't have a swim bladder. A swim bladder is a gas bag that normal fish have that allow them to maintain neutral buoyancy. What that does is basically kind of turns a normal fish into a helicopter. They can hover wherever they want in the water column. They add gas to the swim bladder and they float upwards. They remove gas from the swim bladder and they sink downwards. And what we're saying is sharks don't have that. So to be able to stay up in the water column, if a modern fish is a helicopter, then a shark is an airplane. An airplane can't stop moving, right? What happens if an airplane stops moving? They hit the ground, and sharks are the same way. If they don't keep moving, they're going to sink because they don't have that swim bladder. So they have to constantly keep moving. Because they have to constantly keep moving, they also have what's called ram ventilation. If you've ever been to an aquarium, if you've ever looked at an aquarium and you've seen aquarium fish, you notice how the aquarium fish, they got those little gill covers on the side that are constantly moving in and out like this, right? And when you watch that fish, you know what it's doing. If that gill cover is moving in and out, what is the animal doing? What is that doing? Well, it's bringing water in. It brings water in their mouth, just like opening a bellows, right? Reduces pressure, water comes in, the water comes in their mouth, goes over their gills, and then goes out that gill cover. It's called an operculum. But it goes out of that gill cover. Sharks don't have that. We've all seen sharks. They got those slits in their throat, right? No covers over them. So because they don't have these gill covers, they can't breathe like that. So the only way for them to breathe, the only way for them to do gas exchange is to keep moving. And this is why sharks always have their mouths open when they're swimming. Because if their mouth is open, water can come in their mouth, over their gills, then out their throat. Sharks have to keep moving for two reasons. They have to keep moving to stay up in the water column. They cannot maintain neutral buoyancy. If they stop, they sink. They have to keep moving because of ram ventilation. They have to literally ram water into their mouth to pass it over their gills so they can breathe. So they have to move through the water with their mouth open to be able to breathe. And if they stop, they sink and they suffocate. Here we see some pictures of some sharks and some rays. This is obviously a shark. Notice mouth wide open. Here is a manta ray. This is a diver down here. Not really sure if you can see that very well, but this is a legit picture. I know that when we talk about bugs, we talk about this concept of forced perspective. This is not forced perspective. Manta rays are really that huge. They are gargantuan. This is a skate. Kind of looks like a squashed shark. And then this is a structure called an animal called a chimera. They're actually within a different class now. They got their own class, but there's not very many of them. This is Classchondrichthyes.